Rain drummed against the corrugated iron roof of Hut 6 like the impatient fingers of a clerk counting down to midnight, each drop a metronome to the slow unraveling of my nerves. Outside, Bletchley Park slept under a woolen November sky, but inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke, the acrid temps of overheated valves, and the ceaseless mutter of Typex machines spitting out reams of paper that meant nothing until they meant everything. I'd been at it for 36 hours straight, parsing Luftwaffe, weather reports from Stavanger and naval fleet movements off the Faroes, chasing ghosts through rotor settings and stackerboard permutations. My fingers, raw from turning dials calibrated to the thousandth of a millimeter, ached with the memory of 1,000 failed alignments. We were hunting shadows in a labyrinth built of mathematics and paranoia, and sometimes in the dead hours before dawn. I wondered if the Enigma was less a cipher than a confessional one that swallowed truth whole and spat back riddles dressed as orders. Then came the anomaly. It surfaced in the early hours of the 17th. Buried in a routine Kriegsmarine signal traffic burst tagged Convoy HG76 outbound Gibraltar. Frequency 5725 kHz, call sign DKP. Standard procedure dictated immediate decryption against the M4 naval settings for the Beta Eithrecht. Reflector thin B, Ringstejung, the plugboard connections, BR-EP-HM-Q-No-WX. But the output made no tactical sense, no grid coordinates, no U-boat sightings, no convoy composition. Instead, after stripping the indicator and applying the B-gram table, what emerged wasn't a report, but a string of 5-letter groups that, when subjected to our standard cribbing weather, commando stubbornly resisted alignment. It read like poetry forced into a military I flagged it for reprocessing, assuming a garbled transmission or operator error, but something about the cadence of its nonsense clung to me the way. The vowels clustered, the odd recurrence of Lieb and partial decryption attempts, though no German naval operator would dare embed such a word in official traffic. Curiosity. That quiet mutineer gnawed at me through breakfast, a cold slice of spam and weak tea that tasted of rust. I returned to the machine not as a cryptanalyst, but as a trespasser. Alone in the dim glow of the console, I bypassed the standard cribbing protocols and ran a linguistic frequency analysis, cross-referencing it against known personal cipher patterns. WD, occasionally intercept. Love letters disguised as supply requisitions, farewells smuggled in weather forecasts. It was forbidden. Of course, personal communications, even if intercepted, were supposed to be logged and discarded, unless they contained actionable intelligence. But this felt different. It vibrated not with strategy, but with solitude. By mid-morning, I had it, not through brute force rotor alignment, but by intuition, a dangerous luxury in our line of work. And there it was, not in staccato Hermann, but in fluid, heartbroken English, smuggled through enemy encryption like a stowaway in a lifeboat. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then the sea has claimed me, and the sky is no longer mine to watch. But notice, I did not die thinking of torpedoes or depth charges. I died remembering your hands kneading dough on Sunday mornings, the way sunlight caught the silver in your hair when you turned toward the garden. I encrypted this, not to hide it from the enemy, but to ensure it reached you untouched by censors, unaltered by wars, blunt instruments. Tell a boy I saw whales off the Azores, great black shapes gliding beneath the waves like silent prayers, and that I named one for him. Forgive me for not coming home. Forgive me for loving you so completely in a world that insists on breaking everything beautiful. I sat there, the Typex silent now. The only sound, the slow drip of condensation from a pipe overhead and the thudding of my own pulse in my ears. My throat tightened, not from fatigue but from the unbearable intimacy of having read a man's final breath. He hadn't signed it with rank or serial number, just yours. Always. No unit, no position, no tactical value whatsoever. Just love, armored in rotor settings and plugboard wires. I should have logged it as non-operational and shredded the transcript. Protocol demanded it, but instead, I folded the paper once, twice, and tucked it into the inner pocket of my greatcoat, next to my own wedding band, a cold circle of gold. I hadn't touched since '39. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale light bled through the fogged windows, turning the ink on the page into liquid shadow. I knew then I would never report this. The war had taken enough. Let this one secret remain between him, her, and the machine that almost buried it. Weeks passed, and the transcript never left my coat. I carried it like a rosary, its creases deepening with every shift. Every anxious glance toward the door when footsteps echoed too close in the corridor. Premeditul, no one, not Mavis, not Allen, certainly not Commander Travis, whose eyes narrowed whenever output logs showed even a 2% deviation from expected entropy. The message haunted me, not because it was illicit, but because it was so ordinary. A man speaking to his wife, not as a soldier, but as a husband folding laundry, planting bulbs, watching his child sleep. War had stripped us all of such banal tenderness, dressing every emotion in khaki or blackout curtains. But this was love in its civilian clothes, smuggled through enemy lines in the only language they couldn't distort. Mathematics. I began to wonder about him, cross-referencing convoy routes and intercepted Kriegsmarine after-action reports. I traced the likely origin to you. One sunk on December 14th, 1941, west of Manirdu, days after the date in the cipher. The boat had been hunting HG-76, Churchill's precious Gibraltar lifeline, and had vanished after reporting heavy aerial attacks. If he'd transmitted that message in the final hours, before depth charges shook the hull like God's own fist, then he'd known. He'd known the end was coming. And instead of sending coordinates or damage reports, he'd spent his last battery charge whispering to Clara. The guilt festered. Not for reading it, no. That felt like an act of witness, almost sacred, but for keeping it. Shouldn't she know? Shouldn't someone tell her that her husband's last act wasn't duty, but devotion? But how? The Admiralty listed him as missing, presumed lost. No body, no letter. No closure. If I sent her the transcript, I'd have to explain how I obtained it, how her husband's words passed through Bletchley's filters, how I violated every rule to hear his voice. They'd court-martial me. Worse, they'd redact it, sanitize it, turn his raw farewell into a form letter stamped consolation next of kin. And Clara would never know that he thought of whales and silver hair and Sunday dough while the sea filled his lungs. One evening, during a rare blackout drill that left Hut 6 in near-total darkness, I pulled the transcript from my pocket and held it to the faint red glow of the emergency lamp. The paper smelled of wool, tobacco, and my own sweat. Nothing of him. Nothing of her. I imagined her in a small cottage near Cheltenham, perhaps, mending socks by lamplight, glancing at the wireless as if it might suddenly speak his name. Did she still set a place for him at supper? Did she talk to his photograph as if the glass might warm beneath her fingertips? The thought pierced me with a grief that wasn't mine, and yet settled in my bones like marrow. I began drafting a letter in my mind, anonymous. Of course. Just a few lines. He loved you until the end. He said so in code. But even that felt like theft. Who was I to mediate such a moment? A clerk with a screwdriver and a knack for pattern recognition. Not a priest, not a postman of the heart. And yet, the longer I waited, the more the message became Mina's secret. I bore not as a burden, but as a vow. Then, in February, came the breakthrough we'd prayed for. The capture of U-559, Offport said. Among the seized documents was a personal effects ledger, and there, listed under recovered items, but never delivered due to operational security, was a sealed envelope addressed to Clara Wynne, 27, Elm Row, Bath. Inside, according to the inventory, one photograph, one pocket watch, and one undelivered personal letter in English. My breath stopped. They'd had it all along. The real letter ink on paper, not cipher on reel, had been sitting in a locked Admiralty filing cabinet, red-stamped, non-essential, while his encrypted echo drifted through the ether and landed in my hands. I went to Bath on leave, telling no one. Elm Row was a narrow street of Georgian houses, their brickwork softened by ivy and soot. Number 27 had a blue door and a window box of frozen pansies. I didn't knock. I stood across the street for nearly an hour, watching light flicker behind the curtains. listening to the distant chime of the Abbey bells. Then I walked to the post office and mailed the transcript in a plain envelope with no return address, only a single line written in my neatest hand. He made sure you'd hear him. I never learned if she received it. I never saw her face, but months later, after D-Day, after V-Day, after the machines fell silent and the huts emptied, I returned to Bletchley one last time to collect my things. In the archives, I found the official file on you, 109's last transmission. The original intercept was there, stamped decrypted no intelligence value, and BC'd it in Travis's precise script. Discard per standing order, 12B. But someone, perhaps a clerk, with a soft spot, perhaps a woman who lost her own love to the seahead, tucked a carbon copy into a misfiled folder labeled Meteorological Anomalies, Q4, 1941. I took it, not for analysis, not for history, but because some truths are too fragile for archives, too human for war. Years later, long after I'd left cryptography for teaching Latin in a village school, I saw a photograph in a local paper, Clara Wainwright, aged but luminous, accepting a memorial plaque for her husband at the Royal Navy Museum. She held a small boy's hand, her grandson. The caption said "End" behind them. Displayed in a glass case was a faded sheet of paper filled with 5-letter groups. The caption read, "Recovered Enigma transmission, decrypted by unknown hands. The only known personal message of its kind to survive the war." I didn't weep then, not publicly. But that night, alone in my study, I took out my own Copatha, 1ID carried through Normandy briefings and V2 alerts, and read it again by candlelight. And for the first time, I understood the greatest act of resistance in that war wasn't breaking codes. It was preserving tenderness in a world determined to erase it. He hadn't hidden his love to protect it from the enemy. He'd hidden it to ensure it outlived them all.